So John Locke, English philosopher, born in 1632, died in 1704, so he lived to about 72. He came from a very religious family, Puritans, and he attended Westminster School, and he went to Oxford University. So presumably his family had some money in order for that to be possible. So originally he studied medicine. Now, in the late 17th century, the middle 17th century, probably medicine wasn't very advanced. It probably didn't take a huge amount to study medicine, but there was still quite a lot to do. And he became interested in philosophy and science. And obviously, science was a very big topic. People were very impressed by science. And Locke was alive when Isaac Newton published his Principia Mathematica and kind of the great great strides and advances of science. Locke was, I think, trained as in pharmacy a little bit, and he was very interested in science. I think he also had some lab experience. He was famous for his political work, and he was supporting the Whig Party, and it was a time of political turmoil. There was the English Civil War. There was a lot of killing, so it was a risky time to be around and advocating political views. He did flee to the Netherlands for some time in order to avoid persecution. And his work in ideas of democracy had a big effect on the American Revolution. His main sort of philosophical work is an essay concerning human understanding. So what we're going to be interested in is kind of his metaphysical views and his empiricism. So we've certainly encountered some kind of empiricism before, the idea that we should get our knowledge from the world. In some ways, Aristotle argued for that. I mean, Aristotle wasn't a total empiricist, but it certainly, compared to Plato, Aristotle said a lot about we need to actually look at the world in order to understand it. Whereas Plato was saying, oh, don't bother looking at the world, think about the forms, and Plato said your senses will lead you to make mistakes. Empiricists think that certainly our senses can lead us to some mistakes, but on the other hand, they think, well, if you observe carefully, then you're going to be able to at least get somewhere. And generally, empiricists are pretty suspicious of anybody who's trying to bring in mysterious, unobservable entities like gods, souls, immaterial minds, anything which can't be verified by the senses. So Locke was cautious about that. Generally, when we're talking about British empiricism, we identify John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume as the main people. But certainly it was a highly influential movement. So in some ways, Locke was very impressive in that he had so much influence, and his work is still studied today. Now, most philosophers around this time are aware of the work of Descartes, and certainly the empiricists are very critical of Descartes. So you'll remember with Descartes, he had this theory that God must exist. And one of his proofs was that the reason that God exists is that we have the idea of God, and the only way we could get the idea of God is if God gives us that idea, so God must exist. And I guess the sort of reason why he thinks that the only reason we can have the idea of God is from God is that it's such a perfect idea that it couldn't come from any imperfect source. It seems an odd view to us, and certainly Locke thought it was a terrible argument. Locke wanted to say that the way we get our ideas is from experience. So the way we get the idea of God is not from direct experience of God, but rather from having the idea of something kind of perfect and saying, well, that must be God. So his view that there aren't any innate ideas and we get all ideas from experience is often known as the blank slate view. And in Latin, that's tabula rasa. So, and it's often referred to as that idea. So it's whenever the mind is born, whether it's at birth or at some point before then, initially it's completely blank. And eventually, as we get experience, the contents of the mind and the mind's knowledge builds up. Now, Locke wasn't denying that babies have strong instinctual drives. Obviously, if you slap a baby, it cries. That's not something it learns. That's something that is just innate. Generally, if you present a baby with a nipple, it will suck on it, right? That's just innate. There are certainly kind of behaviors which are innate and not even learned, but that's different from having knowledge. And so Locke is saying we don't have any knowledge or even any ideas initially. So he drives home this point that all contents of consciousness come from experience. Experience is the one source of input into the human mind. So then he starts to give a kind of a fairly primitive psychology of the human mind. So he's talking about how the mind works. So I think from our point of view, we would say, well, maybe it sort of makes sense, but it's pretty crude. And when we get to Immanuel Kant, we'll have a slightly more sophisticated version. It's quite different from anything that you would get in a psychology course today. So his initial distinction is between ideas you get from sensation and ideas you get from reflection. So sensation, he says, is from the outside world. So you see things around you and you'll see colors and shapes. You'll be able to with your hands, you'll be able to tell if something's heavy or light, and you can tell how big things are, right? So those are ideas of sensation. Then there's like the internal world. You have experience, you have like feelings, you have emotions, you have thoughts, you have kind of mental operations like planning and anticipating, and all you have when you experience those give you ideas of reflection. So that's one way to divide things up. He also has what we might call a Lego theory of idea, that every idea is either simple or complex, and all complex ideas are made up of ultimately simple ideas. So if for any idea we have, you should be able to break it down into its simplest components and identify each simple idea that the idea is made of. Which is it's a pretty good starting point for a theory of psychology. Although once you start to actually try to do that, it doesn't necessarily seem particularly easy to do. So here's a kind of diagram. And one thing this diagram emphasizes is the distinction between the passive mind and the active mind. So for Locke, getting ideas either from sensation or for reflection is basically just a passive process. We just experience something and it kind of imprints on us. But we can be active in terms of generating complex ideas. We actually have the ability to generate complex ideas from simple ones. So that's where he draws the line between active and passive. When we get to Immanuel Kant, we'll see that Kant thinks that having even ideas of sensation and reflection involves the mind being active. But for Locke, it's passive. So with complex ideas, suppose you experience a red ball, then that you have the idea of the ball and you can analyze the idea in terms of ideas of red, round, hard, cool, and so on. So it's just one attempt to try and analyze the contents of the mind. A further step in his view, and in some ways the kind of more interesting part, is different kinds of complex ideas. So he talks about compounds. So we talked about the red ball being red plus a ball, red house is red plus house, but he also includes relations. So you can have the tree is taller than the bush. That's is a complex idea involving a relation. And Locke puts a lot of effort into giving an account of abstraction. So there's a kind of a big question, like with the idea of God. Now you see particular things. You don't see anything abstract. You never see the number 2. You never see the general abstract redness. All you see is particular red things. But humans have the ability to form abstract ideas like redness and 2 and God based on what they've seen. So Locke says we have the power to create abstract ideas. And so that's largely his answer to Descartes. Descartes says we have to get the idea of God from God. Locke says, no, you can get the idea of God simply by looking around and then abstracting from what you see. So we have you have the ideas of good and better and powerful and more powerful and knowing and more knowing. And so you could take the idea of God and you can go to the extreme with all of those. And then you get the idea of something which is all knowing, all powerful. And so that's how you get the idea of God. You don't need, it doesn't need to be put in you by somebody else. So we're going to start talking about Locke's view of to what extent our knowledge or our experience of the world is as the world appears, which is going to be a big thing, especially in comparing with Hume and Kant. So we need a little bit of terminology. So Locke says we have ideas in our minds, and then the ideas of sensation are caused by qualities in things. So if you see a red chair, then the experience of the red chair is caused by the qualities of the red chair. And he says a quality is just a power in something to cause an idea in us. So it's sort of terminology. The big thing for us is his distinction between primary and secondary qualities. This is not a distinction that he invented. I mean, you can probably find it in some ancient Greek philosopher, but it's especially known in the work of Galileo, and we've looked at it in the work of Descartes. So it's not a complicated distinction, but Locke paid more attention to it and talked about it more. So for Locke, he talks about primary qualities, and primary qualities are actually in the physical object. So the red chair is going to have qualities like its solidity, its shape, its size, if it's moving on at rest, how many there are, and then there's also the texture of the surface. He thinks all of those are primary qualities. Those are things which are kind of related to fundamental properties of matter. All right, so he thinks that since everything is made of particles, and these particles have these primary qualities, then everything must have those primary qualities. He says, well, that's fine, but then he wants to, well, his main point is secondary qualities. This is sort of his definition of secondary qualities, are those qualities where they're not actually, what we see is not corresponding to something directly in the object, rather we have an experience which is related to it, which is caused by the secondary quality. So when you look at the chair, he thinks like the redness of the chair is caused in your mind, but nothing in the chair is actually red. Rather, the chair is just made up of particles with simple properties like size and shape and solidity. None of the particles is a little red particle. So what he wants to say is that when we look at the world, we have experiences which represent the world. And so he says like we do see the world, but not everything in our experience is exactly like the world. So what he's denying is naive realism. Naive realism says like our minds are just mirrors of the world, while representative realism says in some ways our experiences resemble the world, and in other ways they don't. So they resemble the primary qualities of the world. They do not resemble the secondary qualities of the world. So the color red doesn't exist outside of the mind. No problem. So the color red doesn't exist outside of the mind. Sorry, the color doesn't. So yeah, basically you see redness. The chair itself is not red. It may look red, but redness is just an experience in your head. So that's an interesting view. In some ways it seems like common sense, but we can talk a little bit about that. So he thinks that our ideas of primary qualities do resemble the qualities themselves. So you see like a rectangular tabletop, you see the rectangle, and the rectangle in your kind of head resembles the rectangle in real life. And you see a ball moving, the motion of the ball resembles the real motion of the ball. But when it comes to secondary qualities, the redness is not in the object themselves. And you can draw an analogy with pain. So if you're walking barefoot in your apartment, and there's a thumbtack with the sharp bit facing up, and you step on it, and the sharp bit goes straight through your heel. It's going to hurt. You're going to be cursing, jumping up and down, and it's going to be a lot of pain. But you don't think that the pain is in the thumbtack, rather the sensation of pain is something that you're experiencing caused by the thumbtack. We don't think that painful things have pain in them. Maybe little kids sometimes do that, but they soon learn to not think that. If you think about a musical instrument making a noise, we're very used to the idea that the sound is in our heads. There's like vibrating strings on the cello, but the sound, the experience of the sound is in our heads. So what Locke wants to say is when you see a red tomato, the redness is not in the tomato, rather there's a quality of the tomato which causes you to have red sensations. All right, so now our understanding of physics is quite different from Locke's. Now we have an idea of the electromagnetic spectrum, and we know that red light has a frequency of just under 700 nanometers. So when that light hits your optic nerve, you get the sensation of red. So for Locke, all color is mind dependent. Color doesn't exist in the real world. So here's the electromagnetic spectrum. And we should be able, so his idea is that for all our senses, we can explain how we have the sensation without thinking that the color or taste or smell or sound is in the object itself. So with a tree falling, for example, you hear a tree falling, there's a sound wave, the sound waves hit your eardrum, then there's a signal from your eardrum to your brain, and you hear a boom or crash. But the experience is in your head. It's not, the sensory part is not actually part of the tree. When you smell something, you have odor molecules hitting the olfactory bulb. Then there's olfactory neurons in there, and the olfactory bulb sends a signal to another part of the brain, the olfactory cortex, and that interacts with other parts of the brain, and you get the sensation of smell. So it seems like Locke's view fits very well with what we know about our senses. There's also the fact that quite a lot of our sensations seem somewhat subjective. So here's a famous picture. Went viral in around 2015 of a dress. Some see the dress as black and blue. Other people see the dress as white and gold. Not everybody sees it as black and blue.
That one's different from that one. Look at that one and look at that one. Yeah. What's white? I swear, that's really like a gold. Oh, wait, this is not making that another color. That is gold.
I mean, it's definitely blue and black. I mean, there's going to be multiple choice quizzes on this. Like it's going to be blue and black. That's the right answer. But you see how like people have different experiences. It seems like color can be subjective. So this is like the yeah, like 2015, and certainly your experience. Generally, your experiences can be affected by kind of your culture. Certainly, there's all sorts of other meanings placed on color. Black is associated with mourning, white is associated with purity, and sometimes those sorts of emotional factors can influence how people see color. And it can also depend on the background to the color, lighting conditions, and sometimes kind of personal experiences. And also, some people are colorblind, and so they experience the world somewhat differently. So in some ways, Locke's view that color is just in the head kind of fits with this idea that it's subjective. We're not detecting some kind of objective property of matter, rather we are having an experience in our heads. There's a sort of similar phenomenon some people are familiar with cilantro. Cilantro is used in many different cuisines. I guess especially Mexican possibly, and maybe Asian. So some people like it's a lovely kind of fresh thing to put on your food. It gives it an extra nice taste. But some people taste it and it just tastes like soap. And they spit it out and I think that is disgusting. And it seems like it's actually related to, you can look at the genetic differences between people who have these different taste experiences. Apparently East Asians and Caucasians have the highest prevalence of cilantro dislikers, and Middle Eastern, Hispanic, and South Asian groups having the lowest. And it may be also to do with odor rather than taste. Odor and taste are kind of connected. So in some ways, we are very familiar with the idea that our sensations are subjective. So it's kind of pretty easy for us to go along with Locke and say that they're not directly in the objects themselves. So Locke's view is that naive realism is wrong. There's the primary qualities of matter: solidity, size, shape, texture, number, motion, and rest. Everything else is secondary qualities, and secondary qualities aren't there in the same way that primary ones. I mean, sometimes there's like confusing cases like temperature. That seems to be partly to how we talk about temperature. So there's like temperature as an objective phenomenon, which can be read with a thermometer or some kind of like, a thermometer. And so that seems to be objective, but then there's like how hot or cold something feels. That seems to be more to do with the sensation. So the temperature is objective, but the sensation is subjective. All right, so that covers the primary and secondary quality distinction and gives you some sense of how Locke deals with some issues to do with consciousness. So Locke, kind of on his view of what exists in the world, there's four kinds of things. He thinks there's minds or selves, and what he means by that is just consciousness, conscious beings. And conscious beings have ideas, which are the ideas are the contents of our minds. And then he thinks there's physical matter, physical objects. He thinks they're made of corpuscles. There's things, and then he also believes in God. And he does think that you can prove God's existence. So as we've seen, Locke's view is known as either indirect realism or representative realism. It's contrasted with naive realism. So the basic idea is we perceive the world indirectly through our sense data. Locke didn't use the phrase sense data. He was talked about sensations. Sense data is a more modern phrase, but it's quite a useful one because it kind of talks about, say, there are these information bits we get through our senses. So indirect realism says that what we understand about the world is through like a veil or a filter of our sense data. So we can't see, our minds can't like link to objects directly. We always have to go through our senses, so we have to think about to what extent our knowledge of the world is real. That sort of idea. We're also going to, this idea of indirect realism, we're going to see discussed by Hume and by Kant, but they don't agree with Locke about how to think about that. So on this view, there's mind-independent reality, there's the sense data, and there's mediated perception. We can't see, the idea of seeing something sort of directly without an intervention doesn't make any sense. And so the sense data are caused by physical objects and represent physical objects. So I mentioned Locke and God. So one interesting thing about Locke is that he doesn't talk about God a lot. Occasionally he'll bring God in. Locke was probably religious. Maybe he wasn't a traditional Christian. You know, he was from a Puritan family. But he definitely thinks that some kind of God exists, and he thinks it must be eternal, and he kind of believes that there must be an original cause of the universe. So he thinks of God as the first cause. And he also thought that there must be a God because there are moral laws, there are moral duties, and he thought there must be a divine lawgiver. But unlike Descartes, Locke does not place God at the center of everything. You know, God has a very scientific view, a very mechanistic view, so God's there sort of on the sidelines, and occasionally he brings God in sort of as a potential to do some rescue work when he gets into trouble. So let's look at Locke's view on mechanism and gravity and action at a distance. So as we've seen, he's an empiricist. He thinks all knowledge comes from sensory experience. And so he was very interested in mechanism, the idea of the universe as a machine, and the concept of gravity acting at this distance, and trying to work out how those things fit together. And eventually he brought in God as a potential rescue. So Locke was certainly familiar with the ideas of Isaac Newton. He called Newton incomparable, and he closely studied the Principia Mathematica. So Newton challenged mechanism because Newton believed that one planet or one force could directly exert a force on another. Newton didn't have any explanation for how that happened, but he thought, well, it definitely does happen no matter how it happens. So Locke was initially kind of very attracted to mechanism, but then it seemed like there was a problem with mechanism, that it couldn't explain how there could be action at a distance. So Locke was partly kind of like Newton, saying like he just didn't know how it happened, but he also was ready to say maybe God does it. Maybe God is the one who exerts the force. Maybe that's how one physical object exerts a force on another. Let's talk about that in a little more detail. So we now have a pretty good idea what mechanism is. It's the idea of the world is made of these particles, and everything is like a machine. This idea was especially supported by Robert Boyle. Locke studied with Robert Boyle, and so he knew a lot about it. But then he was very well aware that mechanism couldn't explain gravity. Now, he didn't want to just bring in like mysterious qualities, occult, he called them occult qualities, which didn't really explain anything. What he liked about mechanism, what he thought it was just totally clear how that worked. You have one object hitting another, there's Newton's laws, the second one moves off. So say, well, like there was some mysterious powers, he didn't want to go that way. So he started off in life as a mechanist, but once he became familiar with the ideas of Newton, he kind of changed his view. So he proposed that God could super add properties like gravity and motion. And so he started to blend a kind of theological approach with philosophy. And you might sort of wonder, he didn't want occult properties, but he was saying, well, God can do it. It's like, well, is that making things any clearer than just saying it's mysterious? That seems sort of tricky. But one thing to bear in mind is that he didn't necessarily kind of say, oh, he had the right answer. He was just sort of speculating. He didn't know how it happened. He was pretty humble about it. He says, like, I just didn't know. But he was open to theological explanation. So that's one of his approaches there. So in terms of a kind of a summary, the action at a distance really challenges this mechanistic philosophy. And Descartes had the vortex theory, and Newton sort of hinted at some kind of divine ether, but Locke said maybe it's a divine power. That's the sort of quick summary of it. All right, so that kind of maybe makes the whole project of seeing the world as a mechanism kind of, well, it's more complicated because then it seems like God's involved, but he's trying to kind of maintain something. He wants to hold on to mechanism, not completely get rid of it, but he doesn't want to kind of be totally speculative. So he's taking a middle path. And he's still trying to remain scientific. All right. So that's action at a distance. The last thing I want to kind of talk about is consciousness, what we would now call like the mind-body problem. That wasn't a phrase that Locke used, but it was still an issue he was very well aware of. Right. So he didn't have any explanation for how consciousness came about, or at least not any definite one. But he had a whole theory of the mind and theory of ideas, and so he went. We've talked about that, and we've seen kind of three different views. Well, we've seen especially Descartes' view. Descartes is a dualist. He thinks that the mind is the same thing as the soul, and the soul is immaterial. We've seen Hobbes's view. Hobbes is a materialist. He just thinks basically the mind is the same thing as the brain, or mental phenomena are the same things as brain processes. And Locke wants to kind of, doesn't want to agree with either of them, but he wants to have some sort of middle path there. So we've seen how he defines consciousness as the perception of what occurs when the own mind. It's kind of ideas of reflection. And he has a theory of personal identity. He doesn't think what makes you is your body. He thinks what makes you is the continuity of consciousness over time. So basically, if you remember your past, that's what makes you the same person over time. Now, you are in your, say, at the age of 20, and you remember being 10 years old. So that memory is what makes you the same person over that period of time. And you can extend that sort of memory theory and to give a whole theory of personal identity, and Locke did that. So he thinks that we have like this sort of self-awareness. He didn't kind of have a particular explanation of how we come about with that self-awareness, but that's our consciousness, our ideas are one of the most important things about us. So Descartes had a sort of similar view of the contents of our minds as ideas, and we've seen how he believed in like the mind-body distinction and cogito ergo sum, the proof of his own existence as a thinking being, as separate from a physical being. For anybody who wants to say that mind and body are totally separate things, the huge question is, how do they interact? How can something which is non-physical interact with something which is physical? Descartes didn't necessarily have a full explanation of that, but he did have a theory that where the interaction happens is the pineal gland, which is sort of in the middle of the brain. It's not clear that he was fully committed to that, but it was like a suggestion. So he was saying like the soul interacts with the body through the pineal gland of the brain. So Descartes was totally happy to say that the human body is a total machine, but it's driven by the mind. So the mind is what gives the machine instructions. So he thought that our sensations are due to our soul, and the physical body doesn't itself have sensations. That led to his somewhat shocking view that other animals, like cows or horses or dogs, since they don't have souls, they don't experience any sensations or any pain. So they are just machines, and he thought they don't have any minds at all. So I think Descartes either approved of or he actually practiced vivisection, cutting open animals without any anesthetic. And he said, well, they don't have any mind, so they don't experience anything. From our point of view, that seems barbaric. So one of the problems of dualism is like, well, how is it possible? Does dualism actually get us anything? Does it explain anything? The dualist is saying like there's a soul, some non-physical substance, and the question is, well, does that explain consciousness? I mean, do we understand the non-physical substance? Can we measure it? No. So there's a big worry for dualism that you're kind of proposing there's a non-physical substance, the soul, but it doesn't actually do any explanatory work. So in some ways, from a scientific point of view, it seems like dualism is not an impressive theory. but it remains like a strong contender, probably because it's so tied in with religious views, which people have a very strong commitment to. If you want to believe that you can survive your physical death, then it makes a lot of sense to say, well, you are not your body, you are a soul, and your soul can survive your physical death. So people have a strong commitment to the idea of a soul, even though there's no sort of scientific evidence for it. And we've also seen Hobbes's view. Hobbes rejects dualism. He says everything is just matter in motion. And so the mental phenomena are just the physical brain activities. Hobbes has a totally mechanistic view. So he's definitely kind of close to being an empiricist. But I mean, one thing we might be worried about as from an empiricist point of view is, how does consciousness get caused by physical matter? It just seems like there's something very different about consciousness, and it's just hard to imagine how it could be caused by matter moving around. And it's not clear that Hobbes had any kind of explanation for that. So it can, like, the materialist view struggles to explain anything like subjective experiences. And we've talked a lot about like the subjective experience of color and other sensations. And it just doesn't seem that Hobbes's view gives us much explanation of that. So it seems like it's missing out on a lot. So Locke's view can be seen as a sort of a middle position. Locke says that he just, to a large extent, we just don't know how substance, how either the soul or how a matter could lead to consciousness. So he's certainly not sure that a soul or an immaterial spirit helps you explain anything. When he's talking about personal identity, he says the idea of a soul just doesn't get you anywhere. You don't have any particular experience of an immaterial soul. You don't know how many souls you have. You don't know if like you have a constant flow of souls going through you. Nothing in our experience really tells us about these immaterial souls. So he doesn't think the soul gives us much explanation. But similarly, it's also a puzzle how matter could give rise to consciousness. So Locke, in a similar way to how he deals with action at a distance with gravity, he says maybe God adds consciousness and thinking to matter. So God enables consciousness without there being a separate spirit. He's not sure what the answer is, but he definitely thinks that that might be one possibility. So that covers what you need to know about Locke.